And awesome. Hopefully you can see the slides because I can no longer see anyone else.
We can see them.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Yeah, again, thanks for having me. My name is DJ, and I'll just go ahead and get this started. So usually when I do this, it's a pretty interactive, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to see anybody, so that'll make it a little bit complicated for me, but bear with me. One of the things, though, I'd like is usually, like, again, since this is sort of interactive, is feel free to unmute and ask questions as we go along on the slides. I'm going to go kind of fast. I mean, you'll have access to these slides, and you'll be able to review some of this. If you have more sort of programmatic building type questions, let's wait for the end, because then we can go through those in a little bit more depth. But again, it's interactive, so jump in if you have questions. So I'm going to start off with why me and not a guest speaker or law enforcement. I guess I am the guest speaker here in this case, but one of the reasons, and I'll go into the why not law enforcement piece in a second, that I like to do these sort of talks is, and I don't have any control of my slides here. Here we go. First is that I've actually taught this course or some version of this course hundreds of times in healthcare, in hospitals, in schools, businesses. I actually taught this in foreign embassies and have a background in healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of other things that I think make it a relevant topic for me to teach. I've written active shooter programs for schools. I've written them for hospitals and healthcare, but I think that healthcare piece is probably the most important. I've been in healthcare at some level since 1994. And so it's a really different environment, right? So I think having somebody who can speak to that piece is important because it's a little bit different set of circumstances. So that's enough about me. So again, usually this is interactive, and if anybody, or maybe Jack, if you want to just let me know if there's chat or thumbs up, since I can't see the screen anymore, but really just asking who's been through an active shooter training before of any type. And if there's anyone who has. Looks like we have a little bit of chat here. Okay, yeah. We have some, okay. I don't know why I keep losing control here. Here we go. Who has seen the Run, Hide, Fight video before? Okay, looks like we've seen some more. Yes. No. And this one's interesting. I think so. That's a good one. This one's interesting because the Run, Hide, Fight, actually, we're going to kind of talk about that and deconstruct that a little bit. It's a really good start, but it doesn't give a whole lot of direction. Going on to the next question. Who here's been in an actual active shooter event before? And I know this sounds kind of like a crazy question, but having done this over the years, I have run into people, and after the Route 94 in Vegas, more and more often, that have actually been in an active shooter event. So if you have been in an active shooter event before, just beware that we are going to be discussing active shooters and violence in some specific cases. And so if that's something you should be aware of, I'm letting you know now. Although just to caveat this, I'm not here to scare anybody because that doesn't do any good. So this is not going to be one of those types of discussions. And then usually I like to ask if anybody is prior military, prior law enforcement. And the reason why is that often in your organizations, these are the people that you can go. If I say something again too fast and you don't want to pipe up and ask what I was talking about, these are the people you can go back to. So again, thinking about that in your organization, if you want to think about who is prior law enforcement or military, those are some good contacts. All right, so now backing up a little bit, I said, why me, not law enforcement? So I have actually worked in law enforcement, executive protection, military. I have all those same perspectives, have written, again, a program for school active shooter events. This talk is really different. And the reason why is a lot of those are based around people that have some sort of reactionary possibility, right? Like you're going to go stop the active shooter. In our case, we're trying to prevent them from happening, or we're reacting to an active shooter, but we're not armed, we're not shooting back. This is different than what law enforcement would do in their response. And so we want to take this and look at this from a mindset perspective, right? So how do we change our perceptions and then prepare better to hopefully avoid and then ultimately react or respond to an active shooter event. So One of the things I like to say first off, right, we are our own first responders. So if we have to think about it this way, if we were sitting on this couch, and this was an actual fire event, we're not going to sit here and call 911 and say, oh, well, the fire department's underway. I'll just go ahead and wait this out. It'll be fine. As soon as they get here, everything it'll be fine. No, we're going to get off the couch. We're going to recognize this danger. We're potentially going to fight this fire, although at this point I wouldn't bother. But we're going to take some sort of an affirmative action, right? We're not just going to call for someone else to come take care of this and just wait it out, because this would not be a safe situation. So keeping that mindset piece top of mind here, the things we're going to cover today, and I know these were on the flyer, but we're going to define active shooter, really important for a number of reasons. We're going to talk about run, hide, fight again. We're going to talk about some of the threats that we see and why they're important. Talk about awareness a lot and priorities during incidents. We're going to explain sort of what we should be doing and thinking about, and what the police are going to do in the event that they are the ones that stop the active shooter event. Again, violence doesn't care if you believe in it, right? So like I said earlier, this is going to discuss active shooter events and some actual scenarios that have happened in the past. And so just keep an open mind about violence. I'm not trying to be flippant or cavalier sometimes when I say, hit somebody in the face with fire extinguisher or something, right? But we are talking about a violent situation. And so it's better to see it for what it is and then prepare for it. And then I'm going to really just kind of go off the deep end here for 1 second, which is, when we talk about preparedness, which is what a lot of us do, or at least why you're here today, I want to make sure people aren't being paranoid, right? We've seen a lot of active shooter events, and I'll actually cover in a few minutes. They just released a new report. There's more than ever. But preparing for something like this is not paranoia, right? This is just a realization that these kind of things happen and that we need to do something to prepare for ourselves, our staff, our patients' benefit. This line was actually given to me when I went to bomb school like a decade and a half ago by the incident commander from the Oklahoma City bombing, right? So just realizing that humans are capable of doing horrible things. And we recognize that. And so we prepare to defeat those things, but that's not paranoia, because, these things can happen. So we're not going to be paranoid. And you'll learn through the course of this conversation that this isn't about paranoia. It's really just about being prepared. All right. So let's talk about the threat. The number of mass shootings in the United States up until 2021, and a new report just came out, which I'll highlight in a second. You can kind of see almost every single state has had multiple. Unfortunately, California leads the pack. A lot of that is probably just the population that we have. Number wise, it's like a 10th of the US population. So we're probably going to have more events. But we're definitely seeing that those numbers are rising. A new report that actually just pulled this slide up today. This came out, I think, yesterday. The FBI's 2021 stats showing that over the last 5 years, active shooter events have doubled, and in the last 2 years have gone up by a third or a half. So we're definitely seeing more of this, which is why we're here, right? So one of the things we need to consider when we're talking about the active shooter events is, what are the parts that we need to be the most aware of? What are the things that we should prepare for? And one of them is time, right? And this will make a lot of sense as we move on. But most active shooter events, time is really the most critical factor. So when we look at this study that was the one that was the most relevant until yesterday when they released the new one, is that 69% of the incidents they studied ended in 5 minutes or less. And about a third of those ended in 2 minutes or less. So why is that important? Well, it's important because when we think about the role, which we'll talk about in a second, that we have, which is to try to run, hide, fight, which we'll break down. And what the active shooter is trying to accomplish, they're trying to accomplish something in the least amount of time possible with the most impact, right? And so we definitely need to make sure that we are keeping this 5 minute or less window in mind. So looking at a couple examples of how this comes into play, we go back to Sandy Hook back in 2012. 154 rounds were fired in less than 5 minutes. Unfortunately, 26 killed, and 20 of those were children. And the shooter, it was over, and there's disputes 5 to 10 minutes, but roughly somewhere about 5 minutes, the event was over, right? So we can see that within 5 minutes, we had 26 people killed, and that was a significant amount of impact in that 5 minutes. Moving forward just a few years to this event in Dayton, Ohio, this was outside of a nightclub, going into a nightclub where 41 rounds were fired, 9 killed, 27 wounded. If you do the math, almost every single bullet hit something, with 9 killed, 27 wounded. And this assailant was killed in 32 seconds. Again, was right outside of a nightclub. There was law enforcement on site. So as soon as that was, that started to go down, they engaged him and killed him within 30 seconds. We look at this event again, same year, 2019. This was at a church in Texas. Gentleman walked in wearing a trench coat and a wig, acting kind of funny. People were starting to notice, and then he pulled out a shotgun, shot some security guards that were in the church, and then was himself killed by another security officer in the church 6 seconds into the attack, right? So 3 killed, including the shooter himself. But if you look at this picture in particular, right, you're starting to think about 6 seconds. There are people, if you look very lower left-hand corner, this guy in the red shirt, I'm not sure they've even entirely registered what's happening yet, right? So we're going to talk about situational awareness and processing information, but the thing here is that this time is of the essence, right? The shooter is under a very, very limited amount of time, and that will actually work to our advantage. I'm often asked when I'm not doing this in healthcare, or when I start coming back to healthcare, whether or not this is something that happens in healthcare. And I'm sure most of us know that that is, in fact, it does. And that's a yes. And from this same report going back to 2021, the key findings there, there were 15 incidents in healthcare facilities. And so, yes, it does happen. And we'll actually see about a new one here in a little bit. So kind of moving into the whole piece of this now that we've set up what we're here to talk about, let's start with a definition of active shooter. And really, people ask me, why do we want to define this? And, words are important, but there's a lot of definitions that are used for mass shooters, active killing. The piece here that really is the most important is not the number, at least from my perspective, the number of people that are killed for it to count in a statistic. It's just the fact that this person is actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill. And the reason that's important is that we have spent our whole lives being told, don't resist, right? If someone is trying to steal your phone, give it to them. They're trying to steal your purse, just let them have it. If they want to steal your car, give it to them. It's just a car, you have insurance, right? And those things are all true and valuable, except that an active shooter, it's not the same thing. They're not there to rob you. And they're not there to take hostages, right? They are actively killing. So in this case, compliance is not what they want, and compliance is dangerous, right? Compliance will get you killed. So what are some of the drivers of an active shooter? And, probably the obvious we think about is, mental health issues, which surprisingly is not as prevalent in all the cases as you might think. Certainly work-related issues, right? Many of them have been related to somebody who was terminated and then had some sort of, they were upset with work and maybe they targeted a specific person. But a growing number, as you can imagine, is this copycat sort of media coverage. They wanted to be famous. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading slides because you will have access to these. But they did a study showing that a lot of these active shooter events were copycats right after an event. And then a study with 24 active shooters or mass shooters specifically claimed that they wanted the fame, right? So they want media attention. That was one of the drivers. Now, why is this important? Again, if we think about what we just talked about with time, the majorities, almost 70% of these events ending in 5 minutes or less, a third of those in 2 minutes or less, and I want to be really famous. What do I not have? A lot of time, right? And so we're going to be able to use that to our advantage. And so if we look at right now in the United States, which is the most prolific active shooter event that we have, there were 1,000 bullets fired, killing 60, wounding 411, and with all the injuries from tripping and falling and broken glass and everything else, injuries up to almost 900, right? So right now you have 60 people that were unfortunately killed in this event. And if you're the next active shooter whose desire is to break that record, what are you trying to do, right? 61. And you have 5 minutes or less. And so again, this time is of the essence thing is going to play into how we respond, how quickly we need to formulate plans and then react, unfortunately. And then kind of looking down the line, you can see, there's a number of these that you'll probably recognize, but you'll notice that the sort of the death count, unfortunately, has continued to grow, right? And so if this driver specifically for this sort of fame and notoriety is continuing to trend, we'll probably see mass shootings that are attempting to kill even more. All right, so I had started off asking about Run, Hide, Fight and who had seen this before, and it's a great video. Department of Homeland Security made the first. There's been a number of colleges and even some hospitals that have sort of adapted it and changed it, which is important, I think, especially from the healthcare perspective, because often we don't, the industry, I guess, doesn't consider that, like healthcare specifically isn't like a high school. There aren't a bunch of doors that lock necessarily. There isn't a bunch of furniture you can push in front of it all the time. There are sometimes rooms that don't lock at all. There's curtains, there's windows and doors. There's all kinds of things that are different about a healthcare environment. If you talk about a high school, everybody there is pretty much capable of running or hiding on their own. But if we think about a clinic and we have children and infants, not so much, right? So we have different considerations. But the other piece of that is that this doesn't always give you a lot of direction. So when we talk about run, I'm going to use the words evade or escape. I might still say run, but this is more what I'm talking about. Run is what little kids do. Go run. But where? With what purpose? To what direction? Like, it doesn't give me any sort of purpose. And when we think about an active shooter and we want to escape or we want to try to evade them, that makes a lot more sense. And we'll talk about how that sort of can work against us if we just run. Hiding, again, you can tell children to hide and they will go hide behind something, and it's really important, but it doesn't necessarily give us clear direction. Like we're going to break it down in a minute when we talk about sheltering or barricading, right? Hiding is not the most effective thing in the world. If that's the only option that you have, then sure, you can do it, right? Because you can hide behind a curtain or a set of blinds, and if you're not seen, then that worked. But it's also not providing a whole lot of protection. Sorry, I've got phone going off here. And then fight, and even if you look at this picture, it looks like the icon's got boxing gloves, and that's the reason I don't like it. Fighting is consensual, even if it's not, right? But it's generally not meant to be to the death. So when I think of fighting, I think of consensual fighting, right? Two people fighting over a parking spot, which is dumb. That's an ego thing. Two people getting in a fight over, you looked at my girlfriend or something. That's another ego thing. It's dumb. This is a person who, as we defined, is actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill. So this is not about fighting. This is about counterattacking. This person's intent is to kill, then I need to try to bring some level of seriousness to my fight, and then counterattack them, which we'll see some examples of. Okay, so started breaking it down with the first one instead of run, talking about evasion and escape. One of the things that we have to think about is if we just run, where are we running to? Am I running to a specific office? Am I running outside? Am I running down a hall? And more importantly, what might I run into, right? We're creatures of habit. So if I continually come in, let's say the north door, every time I come to work, and I always leave out of the north door, if there's an emergency, active shooter, earthquake, fire, plane hits the building, no matter what it is, and I run to the north door and now I cannot get out of it, will my brain freeze? Will I be able to think of another way to get out, right? And so this picture might look a little unrealistic, but this is actually what happened in Virginia Tech. The shooter there chained the doors shut and then systematically walked through the building, shooting other fellow students. I mean, he was a student there, right? So we need to consider that there can be obstacles in our way that would prevent us from simply running, right? So we have to have this methodology of trying to evade and escape is the plan. Sheltering and barricading, right? Instead of hiding. Hiding is one thing, but if I go into a room and fail to remember to lock the door, or barricade a door that does not lock, right? So when we think about typical clinical spaces, and I managed some clinics for a while back, so very familiar with clinic space, right? Generally you've got rooms that don't have locks. Most of the places that I managed were peds, so none of them had locks. A lot of them also had windows in the doors for making sure that you could see in, right? So there was nobody in there with children unattended. That makes it a little bit more difficult in this sort of an active shooter event, right? Where you can't lock a door and maybe you can't even block from somebody being able to see in. So could you barricade it, right? And generally I like to ask, like, who thinks this is overkill, the amount of barricading in this classroom? And in fact, this is a picture from an actual active shooter event. So a 16-year-old kid took this picture from inside of his classroom while barricaded from an active shooter. Now, is it overkill? I don't think there's any such thing, right? What it is someone who's trying to actively kill, who has that, say, 2 to 5 minute window that we discussed, right? So they're on a time crunch, time is of the essence, and they're going to hit this door and not be able to get in. And so they're going to move along, right? And so that's what protects you. Now, could they spend time to get into this door? Probably. Eventually they could have made their way in, but they're eating up all that valuable time, right? So this is why barricading rather than just hiding is an important consideration. Again, in this door, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the debrief section at the end, but same sort of thing. They're trying to block the door closers. They're attaching heavy things to the door to try to prevent it from being opened. Another important piece of this shelter and barricade is to understand the difference between cover and concealment. So when we talk about hiding or concealing, again, I mean, I could hide behind a shower curtain, right? And I'm concealed, but I don't have any cover, right? So I can't be seen, but there's no protection there. Cover is going to be something that's much harder. We'll just say bulletproof for ease of words, or sort of bullet resistant, right? So, your typical office environment or even clinic environment, this is going to be hard surfaces, thick surfaces. So things like exam tables, copiers, refrigerators, file cabinets, bookshelves, anything that has density and mass, because this will potentially either stop a bullet or deflect a bullet more than, let's say, just hiding behind a simple, curtain or behind a door. And so talking about the door, I like to put this in because one of the things that's really important that a lot of people don't realize is that, doors, and we'll see walls in a second, are not bulletproof. And a lot of even sort of common small handgun rounds can go through them. So as we start to consider where we're going to shelter and barricade, that idea of doing so behind something with mass becomes more important. And we're going to watch a quick video here where we're going to see this demonstrated with drywall for a purpose, because again, I've done this drill a million times where I've seen people just sort of hide behind a wall, thinking as you would, probably because of movies, that that's going to protect you. But this video is going to show is just a simple handgun, 9mm, nothing special, not a big high-powered rifle, shooting through multiple walls. Oh, we don't want to go that far. All right. Pause. So when you look at this, what you essentially see is that there are the mock-ups of 8 walls. Now, granted, the walls aren't going to be that close together. There could be other things in front of them or behind them. But what you saw is just a simple handgun that penetrated 7 walls and then hit and stuck into the 8th, right? So again, as we're considering not running, but evading and escaping, and now not just hiding, but sheltering and barricading, keeping in mind that we're going to want to put solid objects between us and the outside, right? Because we now know that walls are not going to be an effective cover. But could we use the weakness of drywall to our advantage, right? I mean, drywall is pretty weak. If you think about it, like in your house, your office, if you want to hang a picture on the wall, you have to get special hangers. You have to use, 3M pull tape or something, because if you just try to nail a nail into the wall, it'll pull out. It'll make a bigger hole. The picture will fall off because drywall is pathetically weak. And so you could, when we talk about, moving through our space, and we'll discuss this a little bit later. But we might get to the first room that we can safely, and let's say it's a janitor's closet, and there's not a good spot to be in. But could we potentially use that ability of drywall to be fractured to make a lateral movement from that room into the next room, right? Where there might be more bookshelves, more equipment, a window that I can escape from, and something of that nature, right? And so this is, again, this shift in mindset where we need to think about, and I hate the term, but this sort of outside the box thinking. of how we could escape, right? And so one of those is to realize that drywall is pretty fragile and that we could actually break through it to get into a different space. This one right here, I just want to kind of highlight. Now, we've talked about drywall and doors, but not to assume that, just because, oh, this wall is brick or this wall is concrete, that's necessarily safe either, and that we continually need to sort of be upgrading our situation, right? So we need to keep looking for options to get out. We need to be looking for things that are more and more dense that we can keep sort of piling up and be behind. And so this case actually is an AK-47. So this one is a high-powered rifle, and you can see how this plays out.
All right, guys. Our target today is going to be this 4-inch concrete block, and very heavy, as you can see. Solid piece of concrete, like I say, 4 inches thick. Pretty solid. Some might think they're safe behind that big thick piece of concrete, but I don't know. I think the AK is going to make short work of it. So let me get the camera set up and we'll be right back and see how it does.
All right, so you can see that, even a big chunk of concrete, not necessarily, the be all end all. So we need to keep upgrading the situation. So the other thing that I want to point out here is, run, hide, fight. It's a good little thing to remember. Again, we've expanded on this, but a couple points here. One is it's not necessarily linear, right? So my plan might be I'm going to run and then I'm going to hide and I'm going to fight if I have to. But I might hear gunshots and need to open my door or get against the door and sort of take a little moment to, do I know where it's coming from? And if I don't, and the office I'm in is the safest place, or I can go out the window, I'm good. If I'm in a room where there's no way out and the doors don't lock, and I think I hear gunshots at the other end of the building, would it be better for me to maybe get out, move to another space, and then hide again until I'm sure that the gunshots are coming from another location? You kind of get the idea, right? This isn't going to just be do one, do the other, and then the third, right? The other piece of this is the fight piece. And there's a lot of people that say, I'm not going to fight. I would just run, or I would just hide. And we don't always get to choose, right? So one of the things I like to bring up is if you were sitting at your desk and you heard gunshots, and when you got up and turned around the corner, this was the first thing you saw, right? So now the option to run or to hide are out of the question, right? At this point, we need to start thinking about that third piece, not the fight, because again, this is not consensual, but counterattacking or counter-assaulting, because at this point, again, running and hiding is sort of out the window. So this is where we need to go into that mama bear mode. We need to flip the switch into realizing that this is a predatorial type violence. And then we need to do whatever it's going to take to win this encounter. And so that can be just decisive, explosive reaction with, any sort of name the self-defense you might have ever studied, with eye gouges or whatever, or simply hitting someone in the head with your, big Hydro Flask bottle that weighs like 8 pounds when it's full. But that we have to be actively participating in that scenario. And again, I started out in the beginning by saying that, this is an active shooter is someone who's actively engaged in killing, and that there's not really a place for complying, right? And so, and just to kind of drive that home, this case in Walmart in Texas, a few years back, where the shooter was actually systematically walking through the store. People were on the ground asking him, please don't shoot me. And he was just shooting them in the head as he walked by. And again, keep an open mind. I know this is a hard talk. We'll see sort of where this goes in the end, which will, hopefully make you a little bit more empowered. It's not all doom and gloom, but to realize, to drive this part home, to check this box in your head, that compliance piece is not an option. Okay. But you might think, I'm not the kind of person who could just rise to the occasion and fight. I can't run, I can't hide. That guy comes around the corner and points a gun in my face. I'm not going to know what to do. I can't do it. And I will just beg to differ that if you consider it to be a possibility, and and start to think through the fact that you are willing to do whatever it takes to go home to your, you know, your significant other, your kids, your pets, whatever that is that's driving you, that you might, right? You have to sort of make that sort of mental switch now that I am willing to fight. Obviously, you'll have to rise to the occasion or not, but you have to start with the fact that I will, right? And so these stories here that I kind of highlight is that I'm sure that this mom who fought off a cougar who was attacking her son never planned to do so. I don't know if anybody has a cat, but I have several, and it, you know, 4 pounds. The scariest thing you can do is try to give one a bath. I don't want to fight 100 to 150 pound cat, right? So prying open the mouth of a cougar is like one of the most terrifying things I can imagine. And I'm sure she had zero training to do so, but rose to that occasion, right, when life was on the line. And then this story of a 13-year-old that the mom was being attacked by somebody with a sword, and he jumped in and counterattacked a dude with a sword, and was able to defeat the person and stop the attack, right? So I'm sure neither one of these people trained for violent encounters with cougars and swords, but both were able to do so. And then, you know, thinking about how could I do so? And I mentioned a second ago, you know, your huge Hydro Flask bottle, you know, don't underestimate the things that are on your desk, the things that are around you as potential improvised weapons. You're going to see in this video one that we preach pretty often, which is often in offices, fire extinguisher, right? Can be used to spray very effectively because it creates a cloud. It can blind a person. It's very hard to see when you're being sprayed in the face with a fire extinguisher. It could also be used as an impact weapon, right? You can hit someone with a fire extinguisher. But what you're going to see in this one is a really interesting use of a different improvised weapon. And so this was a terrorist in a bridge in England a couple of years back with 2 knives that was stabbing people crossing the bridge. And what you're seeing in this video are 2 bystanders who were able to slow him and eventually get him down using the one that we just discussed, which was a fire extinguisher, by spraying and occasionally hitting this attacker with the fire extinguisher. And then this second weapon, which I don't know if you caught it in the description, but this just goes to show that anything can be used as a weapon. So the guy on the left is actually holding a narwhal tusk. So this is a whale tusk that's like 8 or 9 feet long. And it just happens that the gentleman on the left was a chef from Poland. He had walked past a restaurant at the other end of the bridge, remembered that there was this tusk on the wall. When this event took place with a guy stabbing people on the bridge, ran back to the restaurant, pulled it off the wall, came back and was able to subdue him with the help of the gentleman with the fire extinguisher and a narwhal tusk, right? So anything can be used as a weapon when life is on the line, as long as you make that commitment to survive. And then, you know, one of the other things that we always hear about, and I don't like to spend a lot of time on this one because it's pretty much the obvious, although I do like to make a couple of sort of caveats to it, right? So obviously communication is vital. Everybody in healthcare should know this, and I don't get the raise of hands, but I mean, most of us have gone through some sort of CPR training, right? And I always like to ask, you know, what's the first thing you can do wrong when you're taking your CPR certification course? And it's usually, you know, you forget gloves or the scene is safe. But the other one is you forget to tell someone to call 911. And then if you forget, no one will, right? So you have to say, call 911 and come back. One of the things here that's important, obviously, is we're going to try to call 911 as soon as it's safe to do so. You know, turn off the ringer, turn off the lights, do all those things. I'm sure in the heat of the moment, you're going to do whatever you can do to survive and probably not remember any of these things. The thing to remember is that as soon as you can remember, call 911. Try to make that call from a landline. You can call from your text. Not everybody's aware, but you can text 911 from a cell phone. So some way get 911 started, right? Because the event will probably not end if we've all assumed that someone has called and no one has. Now, the other piece of this that I always like to sort of drive home, and we in healthcare use a lot of codes, is that I am a firm believer, and will preach this until I'm gone, that in an active shooter event, especially, that we should be using plain language. And so I know we look at the, you know, the codes that are on the badge, the code silver for an active shooter. And the reason I don't think this is valuable is I can't tell you how many times I've done this. And I'll look at a room full of, you know, 50 people and ask, what's the code for active shooter? And I get a whole bunch of blank stares or people turning the code over. If it's not something that you know for sure, and somebody calls code silver and everybody's trying to wonder what that means, it hasn't done any good. The other piece of that is now I like to flip it around, and I'm a parent, I'm sitting in a room and somebody's calling code silver and I don't know what that means. I can't do anything proactive to help my own family, right? My own kids, maybe help the people in the room next to me, because I don't understand what's going on. And so I really like to preach, use both, but definitely at some point use plain language so that you can announce that there's an active shooter, so that other people in the building can take proactive responses to get out, to barricade, to break windows, whatever they need to do. I have had people challenge me like, well, but now we're telling the active shooter, X, Y, and Z. That person knows they're there and they know what they're doing. So we're really not telling them anything that they don't already know. So I don't really see how there's any advantage to plain language announcements of an active shooter. So now we're not actually going to do a drill today, but we're going to talk about how this all fits together. And I'll show you drills that I've done in the past. We'll definitely walk through some of the components and then hopefully get some Q&A at the end about how to make that a really beneficial experience. But really how I tie all of this together is that we sort of front loaded this with here's the threats, here's what active shooters are, here's what run, hide, fight is, and how we should kind of change it. And then we move into this next piece where we're going to talk about recognizing, well, first just recognition in general, situational awareness, because a lot of people don't have it. And then starting to recognize some threat indicators, changing our mindset, making better decisions faster, and then practicing these things by doing a drill. So one of the things that we can initially sort of front load into people, that this will all be clear in a second when we talk about situational awareness and OODA, and then I guess reinforce in a drill, is this idea of fireworks. Okay. And so with fireworks, I have probably read hundreds of after action reports from almost every active shooter event that I can find. And if you don't know, you can just go online and Google Las Vegas shooting after action report and get a couple 100-page report on everything that happened, every agency's response. But you'll also get a lot of information about what the witnesses saw. And so one of the things that comes up very often is this idea of fireworks. People saying, I thought I heard fireworks. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video, and I want you to kind of listen for that.
Night. Deadly shooting at a food festival in Northern California. 3 people killed, at least 15 injured. A gunman opened fire. He was shot and killed by police. They're now searching for a second suspect. I want to go back to ABC's Will Garr, who's in Gilroy with the latest. Good morning, Will.
In Georgia, we've just confirmed the suspect in this shooting was 19-year-old Santino William Lagon. Witnesses at first say they thought that fireworks were exploding, but then quickly realized they were under fire. That horrifying moment caught on camera when the first shots rang out at the Gilroy Garlic Festival in California. What's going on?
Night.
All right, we're going to stop this one right here for a second. So you obviously heard what people thought they heard. They thought they heard fireworks, right? And we're going to listen to it again for a second because I want you to listen and say, does that sound like fireworks?
At first say they thought that fireworks were exploding, but then quickly realized they were under fire.
All right, so hopefully everybody can hear that okay. Sometimes it's hard when you're on Zoom calls, but I'll be honest. It could sound like fireworks, right? Absolutely. But here's the things you got to ask yourself. Why would there be fireworks in the middle of the day, in the middle of a concert? Generally, when there's fireworks at a fair or at a concert, you're going to know that they're going to be there. It's going to be after dark or near dark. The band's probably not playing. It's not in the middle of their show, right? So these are things that we'll kind of go through when we talk about situational awareness. But really, one of the things that we like to, everybody to leave with from this talk is that, if you think you hear fireworks, and again, this context is really like inside of our clinics, if ever indoors, don't discount that. Immediately react to that, right? Like, when was the last time you ever heard fireworks inside of your clinic? Hopefully never. If you have and you reacted to that, good for you, because you can still catch things on fire. It could still be dangerous. It could still be a diversion. There's something weird about fireworks inside, right? But we do not want to try to rationalize that or discount it. We want to try to trust our gut whenever we can. You know, evolutionarily, we were built to react to danger that we didn't always even perceive, and we've just got really good at ignoring it. And I'm going to skip this slide. But if you haven't read The Gift of Fear, this is a book about trusting your gut instincts. So kind of moving into the next piece of tying this together, you've probably heard me say active shooter or active killer. And so, you know, again, I don't get to see a lot of faces or raises of hands, but, you know, why do we use the two terms, right? So the one, obviously active shooter, we think active shooter, somebody with guns. I don't know if anybody knows, there was another active shooter event today at an elementary school in Texas. The last I saw was still reports coming in, but there were multiple people at 2 hospitals, no other real information. The shooter's in custody, but we'll have to find out what happened, right? So we know about active shooter events. But what other kinds of events are there, right? So we know firearms, but there's also edged weapons, right? And so it's not uncommon for there to be stabbing type events. And we just saw the one on the bridge in London. It happens in the United States quite a bit also. We've had those attacks here in California as well. But what would be different about that? Well, what would be different about that might be just what's going to cause us to understand something's happening, right? So for one, we're not going to hear gunshots or what we think might be fireworks that we can react to. And often when people are stabbed, unless they see the knife, they think that they've been punched, right? So somebody could walk through a crowd of people stabbing, and it's not necessarily going to create a lot of panic or a lot of noise, right? So what we need to be trying to pay attention to is the movement of crowd, eventually people yelling, and then trying to figure out what's happening. Vehicles is the next one that we got to consider, because, you know, this is probably more, you know, just going about your daily lives, but this can also, and I know that I have consulted on this a few times, impact, you know, clinical operations. When you think about, you know, especially like the early COVID screening operations, we had a lot of people outside. Could it have happened even accidentally, right? But could it have happened where someone had run through a crowd of people? Absolutely, because it does happen. This picture right here was New York City. A guy rented a Home Depot truck and then just drove through the bike path, right? This one, what we might hear is, you know, engines roaring and cars colliding and different sounds, right? But again, we have to try to be aware and have this awareness of what's happening in our environment. And then sort of the last one that a lot of people don't consider is improvised explosives, right? And so, you know, we're 20 something years past now out of 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, but probably prior to that, other than maybe the Unabomber or a couple other cases, we didn't typically think about bombs or improvised explosive devices as being a threat. And just to kind of show that they are, right? This picture right here, this is a bag full of pipe bombs. So in an active shooter event, this was used. This was actually from the San Bernardino shootings, which were tied to, you know, the shooters, the husband of which was a public health inspector. So worked, you know, not in healthcare, but sort of along the same public health lines. And this was at a Christmas party, right? So definitely something that could have been much worse. There were a number of people killed. These bombs were not used, but they were certainly part of the palette. This was the living room of the Aurora, Colorado shooter, the Batman Rises shooting. And so this was what he had set up in his living room for the eventual police responding to his apartment, right? Obviously, he knew that at some point law enforcement was going to come to his house, and this is what they were going to be met with. These were improvised explosive devices. But even going way farther back in the Wayback Machine, right? These 2 guys right here, this is 1994 at Columbine. And so, you know, we think 1994, this is definitely pre 9/11. This is before we think about improvised explosives and car bombs and these sort of things that came out of, you know, mass media exposure from the Iraq War and Afghanistan. Any sort of current veterans experiences with either of those, right? It just wasn't something we thought of very often back in, let's say, the mid 90s, unless you were, you know, in the IRA or something. But in fact, there were a number of explosive devices, such as this one. This is a propane tank that was rigged with racing fuel explosives. You can see a clock in this picture. There's another one. These were improvised explosives set up in a cafeteria. There were, in fact, 2 car bombs that were set up in a parking lot. So these would have impacted people who were either fleeing the building to go to the sort of safe areas in the parking lot, or probably more likely to target first responders who were going to be coming in. And then these things right here. So this one might be a little hard to see in this picture, so I'm going to forward it. So this is a CO2 or a nitrous type container that was drilled out, filled with gunpowder and BBs. That green thing is a fuse. And then if you look in this picture, take a bunch of matches, it was wrapped around the fuse, and then duct tape. What this essentially is it's called a cricket. This is a hand grenade. And so one of the shooters actually had patches of sandpaper on his vest, and he could strike these and throw these, essentially making hand grenades. How many devices? There were 99 total by 2 high school students who were active shooters, 30 something years ago. So now think about this. Is the threat of improvised explosive devices and active shooters concurrently real? Yes. And again, just a week ago when we had the shooting in Orange County, we'll see a number of these sort of things come up, and you'll start to think about them as you start to hear about them too. But that shooter killed one, unfortunately, a doctor who charged him to try to stop the shooting, and then was stopped by other people in the church. But he had chained the doors shut, tried to glue the locks shut, had bags with multiple magazines with him, and brought Molotov cocktails. So he had brought an incendiary device, not really an explosive device, but had tried to combine these attack methodologies. In San Diego, right here in America's finest city, down by the beach, we don't typically think about these sort of things happening here, but they do. So if you look at this picture, you're probably just thinking this is super messy. If you do any sort of sport shooting, you realize that there is a whole lot of ammo in this picture, and it's worth a lot of money. But really, you just see what looks like a big mess. When you look at this picture, kind of depending on where your eyes go first, you see a bunch of different things. If you look in the upper left, I see these cooling containers. You think maybe this guy's making meth. This kind of looks like a clandestine drug lab. And then you kind of look a little bit farther down, and you start to see these metal, shrapnel pieces everywhere. But if you look in the center of this picture, right, what you see is a hand grenade mold. And so this is a really interesting case. It actually was not an active shooter event, thank God, but it does have an interesting tie into healthcare, which I'll explain in a second. But what this was a gentleman, when he got caught, was making these. And these are what he described as Christmas ornaments, but these are in fact, fragmentation grenades. And he said he was making Christmas ornaments for his friends. He still has never said why he was making these. But what turned out when they searched the house was that this was the largest quantity of homemade explosives ever found any one place in the United States. And so he was making several different types: HMTD, PETN, TATP. All of these explosives are homemade. They all kind of look like maybe baking soda when they're done. And what he would do was make them, and when the batch wasn't good enough, he would just throw it out in the grass in the backyard. This gentleman was renting the house that he lived in, and so there were yard maintenance crews that would come by occasionally and mow the grass and cut the trees and whatnot. And so what had happened is when he would throw these bad batches out in the grass, at one point, one of the landscapers came by and blew part of his foot off, right? He stepped on this stuff. And so, like I said, it's kind of like baking soda. It's very, very unstable. And when the granules rub together, they explode. And so, as you would imagine, when you blow part of your foot off, you go to the hospital. And so he went to the hospital. And then again, as you can imagine, the first thing that the nurse or the doctor is going to ask is, how did this happen? And so when you say, I was mowing the grass at this house and I stepped on a patch of grass and it blew up, and that's why I'm here, the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and everyone else showed up to this house, which again, turned out to be the largest quantity of homemade explosives ever found in one place. They were not even able to search the entire house because, as you saw in these original pictures, it's essentially a hoarder house. They were able to get some of these pictures using a bomb robot, but it wasn't safe enough to go all the way in. So they did the only thing they could. They built this 20-foot wall around the house. evacuated the neighborhood, sprayed all of the houses in the neighborhood with fireproof foam, evacuated the airspace, closed the freeway, and then burned it to the ground. Again, an interesting thing because it had this, sort of nexus back to healthcare, and that healthcare was the one that spotted this. Even a little bit more recently, this was just last month in April, somewhat near where I live, in Temecula, there were 2 rocket tubes found in a trash can behind a school. And so they don't know why these rocket grenade launchers were found. But again, there's this potential, and we're starting to see this, sort of rising violence, that there's a potential for these things to manifest into multiple attack methodologies. And then I said that, in this new report, there is actually a new healthcare attack from the 2022 report. And this one was just last February. You can see here, but this attacker came in armed with a handgun and then 4 IEDs, and 2 of them actually detonated on scene. So again, this is a combination of a shooter using explosives in a healthcare environment, right? So we can see the things that we've sort of been discussing as threats all kind of converge into the space that we work in. All right, so now we've walked through the threat. We're going to start kind of talking about how do we become more aware, right? How do we prevent these things, right? Because we're not law enforcement. We're not going to respond and stop the attacker. We're not going to be able to build fortresses that are impenetrable to anybody, because then patients can't come in. People often ask me, what about metal detectors? Metal detectors only work if you have somebody there with a gun who's going to take stuff away from people that are setting off the metal detector. It's just not generally going to work in a healthcare environment, especially, right? So what we need is more situational awareness to recognize patterns and pre-attack indicators. So talking about situational awareness, I like to start with this story because it kind of highlights a few different things about situational awareness. So going back to San Francisco, 2013, not far from where a lot of you guys are probably at, this Asiana Airlines flight hit the runway, I would say rather hard, because it broke off part of the tail and cracked the fuselage, caught on fire. You can see the top of the plane burned when the hydraulic lines caught on fire. The little inflatables came out the side. Everybody's evacuating the plane. So now think about this. You're in this plane, it hits the ground hard enough to break it, right? And planes just don't break. It caught on fire. You kind of open your eyes after that huge jolt. This is what you see. Everything's a total disaster. The oxygen mask came down and you're like, oh my God, I'm alive. What is wrong with this picture? Right. And again, I can't really see anybody's faces or monitor chat because I'm locked into this one screen. But if you want to come off mute, feel free. Otherwise, I'll let you know the secrets in a second. All right, I put everybody to sleep already. So what's wrong with this picture? I'll say number one, I'm not an aviation expert, but I don't want to sit anywhere near this close to a plane that's on fire, right? I look at this and I have no idea why anybody's this close. I would be like a mile and a half from here by now. But I think the second, probably more important piece, if you look, there's some people here with some pretty substantial size luggage, right? This is not just the backpack that maybe you had on your lap, the purse that you had on, your whatever, right? There are people here that have roll-on suitcases. And you've been on an airplane anytime recently, you know that that's not like under the seat anymore. That's stored in the overhead. And so the interesting piece, right? Got to put yourself back in the scenario where the plane hit the ground hard enough to crack the tail off and the fuselage, catch on fire, the runway things come down, you're sliding off the plane. You would open your eyes to this whole nightmare, and then you thought, hold on, let me grab my luggage really fast. So there's a few things here, right? Situational awareness. You could say this is fear, absolutely, right? Which is why we have the next piece. We'll talk about our decision-making tools. It could be, I don't know what to do. I'm a creature of habit. Whenever I get off a plane, I get my stuff. So that's what I'm going to do, right? But I think I tie that more into situational awareness. Like if I wake up, lived through this, and I'm on this plane, I need to be situationally aware enough to realize that the plane is on fire or could be on fire, that we're not out of danger, and I need to get off this as soon as I can. And unfortunately, just like 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, this event happened where, in fact, a plane did crash. 41 people in the back died as the people in the front were stopping to get their luggage out of the overheads, right? Situational awareness there also, right? Because if I'm in the back of the plane, I'm not going to let people stop and get their luggage. I'm climbing over people, through people, under people, whatever needs to be done, right? But there's this complete sort of disconnect from what's happening in the environment. Right, and we can watch these videos all day. They're hilarious. People on their cell phones just running into stuff, and it's part of just the way things are now, right? Like people are always on their phones. You see in this picture, everybody's on a phone. Half of them also have some sort of earpiece in, so they can't see or hear at all, right? And how this plays out.
And staying in San Francisco, there's now a shocking crime that happened on a crowded train there. Police say this man had been waving and gesturing with a gun on the train just minutes before shooting another passenger. And apparently no one noticed because they were glued to their smartphones and tablets.
Right. So as we see there, I'm not going to show the whole video because it really doesn't matter. But the shooter had been pulling his gun out, waving it around, pointing it at people for like minutes. He would pull it out and point it and laugh, and nobody did anything. How they know? Well, there's video footage, so they know that nobody tried to confront him. Nobody was looking sort of side-eyed and nervous. But also nobody called 911. Nobody texted. Nobody said there's a weird guy with a gun pointing at people. Nothing, right? Because everybody was so absorbed with their phone that they weren't paying attention. All right. So what we're going to talk about here is this decision-making tool called the OODA loop. So you got to memorize this for the test at the end. But we're going to combine the OODA loop and situational awareness together, right? So situational awareness is seeing what's around us. OODA loop is processing and decision making, and we have to have them together because one without the other is not going to be good for us, right? And I am always trying to find the follow-up picture for this because that would be fantastic. It would be golden. All right. So now, what is the OODA loop? This really, I'll just give you the short version, but it was a military tool that combat fighter pilot designed. I can make decisions, shoot down other planes 40 seconds or less, really irrelevant, right? What it is a rapid decision-making tool where we observe things. So that's our situational awareness, and that could be sight, sound, smell, taste, anything around. We have to orient that. So what does that mean? And this is the part that talks like this are hopefully putting little pieces together, right? We're starting to orient little things like fireworks. Fireworks inside, it's not fireworks, it's probably gunshots, right? That's an orientation. And then we make decisions and act. And to show you that we do this all the time, here's a car with brake lights. We see this, we observe brake lights, we orient this to mean the car in front of me is slowing down or stopping or stopped. I have to make a decision to also slow down, turn around, go around the side or stop, and then take that action. Because if I don't take that action, it winds up in a situation like this, right? And I'll just bet, unless this was like a 2-year-old kid that was driving the car that didn't know what the tail lights were, the brake lights were, this was a failure of observation, right? This is probably somebody texting, did not see the car in front of them and then crashed. I'm sure this was not a failure to recognize what the brake lights meant, okay? So when we talk about the OODA loop, it's the faster you get through this, the faster your decision making, the faster you can make these critical pieces of information. I typically ask people, yell out what you see, and I get a mixed bag. People will yell out when they see this smoke, and some people will yell out fire, right? And they're both right. Smoke is technically right, but fire is moving through that circuit faster, right? Because where there's smoke, there's fire. And so I wouldn't have to necessarily put my head over this to figure out this is going to be on fire, right? Because that could be dangerous. So I need to be able to move through that rapid decision making. So now we'll use a real world example of how some of these things tie together, right? So now this is going back to the Gilroy Garlic Festival. Again, I've been there a million times, used to live up by there. I can't imagine that setting was where an active shooting event happened. I can see how people get complacent. You just think I'm just eating, garlic and all kinds of cool stuff. It's fun here. So people are already a little complacent, right? Now the situational awareness is probably down because I'm not expecting to see this. But when we get into this processing information, this is where you can see it happens, right? When you read this, the honey ladies who had a booth here, one of them had actually saw a man with a gun climb over the fence and yelled, "No, you can't do that." That could be like a fear, uncertainty, doubt thing. I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to yell that. But it could be the situational awareness thing too, right? Or my decision-making capability. If I see a guy with a gun, she recognized I saw a guy with a gun. Wouldn't I want to alert other people? There's a guy with a gun. or run, get down, something, right? Because the guy with the gun already knows he can't do that. And so it's just sort of a, ability to make these rapid decisions and kind of cut out some of the uncertainty pieces, right? When you look at the bottom one, another interesting piece, this person, Marquez, said, I saw a guy with a high-powered rifle, right? Like full stop right there. Saw a guy with a high-powered rifle. But then said he was putting in his clip and I knew it right there. But I thought for a minute, it looked like he was pulling up a hose and trying to put something into it. So first recognize the guy with a high-powered rifle, and then thought, no, it's a guy with a hose trying to put something into it. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen somebody trying to shove something into a hose, but that doesn't make any sense, right? What does make sense is what they saw first, which was a guy with a high-powered rifle. This was an AK-74, kind of like an AK-47, not easiest thing in the world to load if you don't know what you're doing. So he had probably flipped it upside down and was trying to shove a magazine in it or putting something in a hose, right? But this is an orientation piece. Now, like recognizing what I see faster can get me out of a dangerous situation, okay? So now we'll talk about the drills piece, because generally this is where we've taken all this information. Everybody's really down because we've talked about, like, obviously this is not a fun topic to talk about. And we start to talk about how we're going to drill this and get this information to help us not freeze, really, right? The fight or flight, we can't really control. You can think you're going to fight or you can think you're going to run. And until something happens, you're really not sure what you're going to do. But what you can't do is nothing, right? Because this hesitation is fatal. So if I don't react somehow, I'm in trouble. And so one of the things that we do, obviously, is drill. And the reason we drill is it does a few things. It causes some stress inoculation, right? When we can do this in a low impact environment where somebody's not really trying to hurt you, we do our drills with a Nerf gun and a little sound generator that sounds like gunshots, so people can try to figure out where it's coming from. It can cause a little moderate stress, but this is just like kids chasing each other with Nerf guns. But it's actually building this mental visualization, right? My brain doesn't understand the difference between thinking about something happening and it really happening, right? Which is why you see golfers take practice swings and baseball players take practice swings, right? Like you're visualizing what you're going to do. So we do the drills so that people can actually test some of the things that we discuss, right? Do the doors open in? Do they open out? Do they lock? Should I run? Should I hide? What can I flip over? Was that fireworks? All of these things, right? And then give your brain this cheat. And I, again, can't see anybody. So sometimes I have to like recognize somebody's too young to know what a Rolodex is. But I almost think of my brain like a Rolodex, like something's happening and it's flipping through there looking for an answer, right? If I've never been in an active shooter event, never even thought about it, never considered it, never drilled it, my brain's going to be flipping through looking for something that doesn't exist. There's no card to tell it how to respond, right? So we do these to try to put the card in there so that if all they think of is run, hide, fight, even though it's just 3 basics, it's better than nothing. They don't just freeze because they have no response at all, okay? And again, I'm going to skip through some of these, but you will get these slides. They're just kind of reinforcing those points. And so then we do it just to test the policies and procedures so that we can refine them. If a lot of times people don't have them, we can help develop them. But this is one of those things where policies and procedures are really a little, I guess, a little slow, right? You need to have training and you need to do drills. This is not a time where I can pull out a policy and say, what am I supposed to do? There's an active shooter. Let me look this up really fast, right? No, you need to react instantly. And so this is a good time for us to kind of look at the way we have, simple directions for how to respond. And then we put people in a drill. We tell them that, it can cause anxiety, but we're not trying to scare anybody. There's obviously been a lot of historical events. I think there was a case in Colorado where a school district hired the sheriff's department to do their active shooter training. They came out with paintball guns and assassinated everyone, like literally shot people in the face while they're hiding under desks. People wound up with scars and, bleeding cuts and stuff. And then they sued the sheriff's department. Nobody learns from that, right? That's not going to help anything. It's just going to be fatalistic and I can't win and there's no point in trying, right? So we certainly don't set that up, but we do tell people, we're going to use a Nerf gun. That way you get a little bit of a visual stimulus. You know who the shooter is. You can take these opportunities to throw improvised weapons. You'll see some put out pool noodle cuttings that are everywhere that you can throw. And then we just give them some simple directions here. Again, I'll kind of skip through these, but we don't let them actually tackle the shooter because that's happened before and it wasn't fun. And then practice things like, if you get shot by a Nerf gun, keep running, right? Don't stop. Just because you're shot, so this is not Hollywood, doesn't mean you're going to die. And, I'll always ask people if you know about, like, the rapper 50 Cent. He got shot in the face 9 times. He's still alive. He's still rich. Like, he still sings, right? So, like, just because you got shot doesn't mean that it's over. So we don't want to practice that way. And then we do the drill. So, again, you can see this. This was a hospital that we did. Me holding the speaker with this little sound generator, somebody with a Nerf gun. I'll skip through these, you can see them. We put out tables with improvised weapons for people to see, think through, like, oh, these are things that I could use. I could use this fire extinguisher, a phone, or this, heavy mug that's on my desk. We have the Nerf guns, which, again, sort of a visual stimulus. You can see it, you can hear it. Gives you a little bit of a sense of I don't want to say fear, a little bit of sense of excitement. And then you can see in this video that I'm going to play how it kind of turns out. Now, I'm going to point out a couple things. One, which is you guys don't get to experience it, but usually this is the time that, again, everybody has been kind of dragged down by the content of this. But you're going to hear people laughing. And the funny part is, right, is that this is where people start to get some sort of confidence, right? Because the things that they have heard and just gone out to practice are working. The other thing you're not going to see a lot in this video is actually a lot of people. And that's because the tactics that we sort of discussed going into this brief, the things they just learned from this talk, like, covering, concealing, closing doors, barricading doors, was put into action. So what you're missing is a lot of people that already had run out of the building or into offices or out of windows. Doors are locked, barricaded, etc. Show another video here so you get another sort of flavor of this. This one will have a few things in the background where you'll see people in moulage, right, which is simulated injuries. And this was when we did a joint thing where we actually treated and triaged patients and transported and did something way more significant, but the active shooter piece will be the same.
Who can tell me where John Smith is? John Smith? Hi. You're good. Who can tell me?
So I'll skip through there. So what you can hear is, again, a lot of people laughing. You can actually hear people screaming, call 911. You see a lot of furniture having to be moved, right, which is slowing him down, getting to doors that are locked. A lot of these things that we had discussed and sort of trained coming into play. So then typically we bring everybody back. And one of the most important pieces here after, again, it sounds crazy, after we get everybody calmed down and they're done laughing because they've had fun running away from each other, is some of the things that they learned from this, right? And so a few that, of course, you guys don't get to experience, maybe someday we could come out and do this, is that it might have been hard to triangulate where the sound came from, right? Because sound is going to echo through rooms and hallways and whatever, right? So we make sure people understand, like, again, don't just run, don't just hide, don't just fight. Take a second and think, do I know where that's at? Is that left or right? Do I hear more than one shooter potentially, right? Like, there's multiple things happening. Can I safely leave this room or should I stay? Considerations of, do doors lock? Again, in the clinical space, a lot of times the patient rooms, especially, not going to lock, right? So if you run to a patient room, that's great. You can barricade, you can do a number of things, but knowing that the door is probably not going to lock. The other piece of this is that if you're like, well, I'll just run to, Dr. Smith's office, the first door on the left, and lock it, what if that's everybody else's plan, right? So there we go with the creature of habit type thing, right? What if everybody's plan was to run to that office and lock it, and you're the first person there? Now, are you going to let them in? Are you going to open the door? Are they going to scream at you to open the door? Work through how this would work, right? Is there a code we could use to let each other in? We talk about barricading and really get a good idea of how barricading can work. Again, this is an imperfect thing, but if I was the shooter and I came to this door, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time trying to get through all of these chairs, right? Some of the other improvised methods we can use, like this belt, anything I can use to shunt an opener can keep a door from being opened, right? Because this gets more complicated with doors that open out as opposed to opening in. You can put a bunch of furniture in front of a door that opens in, but if it opens out, complicated, right? It can still work because it puts a barrier that they have to push through, but not as well. So you can improvise with things like this, right? Adding things with bulk and weight to try to hold the door closed. And then one that, a lot of people don't consider is windows, right? I think we're just raised, right, to just be good, don't make noise, don't break things, right? And unfortunately, in places like Virginia Tech, there were people that died in rooms with windows that were not broken. Consider smashing out a window to escape. And this is something, again, that we have to put in these sort of buckets, these orientations, right? These are toolboxes that until somebody has brought this up and brought it to your attention, maybe wasn't a box that you checked in your own head. But making clear that windows can be broken and they should be, if your life depends on it. And then really just to consider what happens, unfortunately, like what just happened in Buffalo, if you're outdoors, right? So we've talked a whole lot about doors and things of that nature, but cars are, despite what they show you in Hollywood, are not bulletproof. Like even small handguns will go right through a car from door to door all the way through easily. So kind of looking at this picture here with the law enforcement that's hiding behind this car, they're hiding behind the front part of the car for two reasons. One is there's an enormous engine there. And so the engine was definitely going to prevent a lot of the bullets from coming through. But more importantly, there's this huge wheel that has giant brake components behind it. And that's important because if you think about like a Tesla, there's no engine. And so hiding in front of that's not going to do you a lot of good. But you still do have very large brake components. So if you're in a parking lot and you can get behind a car's wheels, then you'd be in a lot safer spot than just running out in the open. And then we go through all of this sort of feedback loops and lessons learned, and then talk about kind of the last piece, which is, what do you do if law enforcement does show up? Because we said we would talk about their response. Now we know it's 2 to 5 minutes. A lot of times the law enforcement's not going to show up. When they do show up, and I didn't get to ask this in the beginning, but think about where you're at. And if you call the police, how long is it going to take? I mean, often it's going to take a long time. I mean, I've been in places that are near a police station, like a block away, and they've called the police and it takes them 8 minutes to get there, right? Like that's just sort of the way it is now. And so if the active shooter event's already over, that's an issue, right? But you could be in a mall or somewhere, right, where there is going to be a law enforcement response. What we're not going to see anymore is this sort of response. There's not going to be a SWAT team coming, right? These events are too fast. So what do we see? Well, right after Columbine, they stopped using SWAT teams and they started using 2, 3, 5 person contact teams. So you wait, get 2 or 3 police together, go into the building. That doesn't work. It takes too long to even get 2 or 3 officers together and get them into the building. So now what they do is what they call this third generation solo entry. But one of the things that I like to tell people up front is that if you flipped this around and you were that law enforcement officer, and knowing what you know when you read that last bullet, right, that a third of them are going to be shot, what would you want to see? So now put yourself in that position. A third of you get shot. I'm running into a building where I have no idea who the bad person is or where they're at, or if there's even more than one. What I'm probably going to want to see is a lot of compliance, right? And a lot of hands up and not a lot of people running towards me, trying to grab me. So this is definitely something to consider, especially, you're in the big places where there probably will have law enforcement at some point, malls or grocery stores, is that you're just going to want to make sure your hands are up, and as much as possible, just try not to rush this person, even though you're going to probably want to, because they're the rescue everybody, right? And I'm going to skip these. So then really the last things I always try to tell people to consider, one is stop the bleed, right? And we do this training down here. You can certainly get this almost anywhere. It's actually virtual course now for Stop the Bleed. And there's even some instructors that are doing virtual skill sessions, but you can take the virtual class, then find an instructor near you and get certified, right? Just like we do CPR so that we don't have to stand by and watch somebody die from cardiorespiratory failure. We don't want to stand by and watch somebody die from bleeding to death. And you look at this, 3 to 5 minutes. If law enforcement takes 7 to 10, even if they took 3 to 5, you know, if police were sitting in our parking lot and an active shooter went down, it's going to take them a couple minutes to come in, a couple minutes to clear it, a couple minutes to clear the entire building. Potentially people have bled to death when 25 minutes worth of training and a $25 piece of equipment could have made the difference. And then the second is, again, I'll just, you know, let these slides come to you so you can read them, but is this tactical breathing, right? And this is just a way to kind of slow yourself down, breathe, because you're not going to be making rational decisions when your heart rate's at like 200, and then start to make really good decisions. And then really just to start having a plan, even if this is a self drill. I get up from my desk and walk out, I'm thinking, what would I do if, which way would I go? Again, not being paranoid, but just having a plan. Right? Not giving up my awareness. So I'm not walking around society or, you know, even my office with my eyes down on my phone and my headphones in, so I can't hear or see anything happening around me, because I can't protect myself or take any reaction if I don't know something's happening. I talk about seatbelts and smoke detectors because usually, again, by now people are like, man, you must be paranoid thinking about this all the time. And I'm not. Right? Because you have a plan. I know where the exits are. I know what I'm going to do. I know if I hear fireworks, it's not, I'm going to start taking action. Same reason that I wear a seatbelt or we have smoke detectors in our house, right? I don't wear a seatbelt because I'm terrified of dying in a tragic car accident. Every time I get into my car, I'm shaking until the seatbelt goes on. No, I wear it because I know it works. I have a smoke detector in my house because, you know, it's not like I can't sleep at night because I'm afraid I'm going to burn to death. And so I just lay there staring at the ceiling all night. No, I have a smoke detector because if there's smoke, it'll go off. I'll be able to take a reaction, right? And so these are the same sort of things that we prepare for. And then really, how do you all, you know, taking these things back to your organizations, prepare, really starts with this policy and procedure development, right? Come up with it, but I really want to reinforce that it should revolve around training and drilling. What are the immediate action steps, right? Because if this becomes another policy that's in a you know 3-inch notebook on a shelf, it doesn't going to do any good. So we need to start considering that. And then our, you know, triage and treatment, if we're going to start taking care of people, knowing that it might take a while for the ambulances to be able to come in. How are we going to know when the event's all clear, right? We don't want to just open doors assuming that it's over, because maybe it's not over. And then, you know, recovery is a whole new set of scenarios for the policies and procedures, you know, psychological first aid and reopening or closure of the building. These are all things we need to consider. And then just building this culture of safety and awareness where we're all paying attention to the things that are happening around us. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and come back on. And now I can see questions and hopefully have some Q&A. And please feel free to come on and ask. I do see a couple things here. I'll just read until somebody comes on. Let's see. Emergency exit leads the same spot, no room to run. Yeah, I don't know the situation there, but look for alternate ways out. Yeah, it's a tricky one. Without being able to see a way out, I'm not even sure what the answer would be. Not being able to call or text 911. Yeah, that's something a lot of people didn't know. It's a really good thing, right? If you text 911, it works exact same way as calling. And why were some of the participants waving sections of pool noodles? So when we do that, those pool noodle sections you saw, those are improvised weapons. And so they can use those are strategically placed everywhere. And we pretend like, what if that's a water bottle? Or what if that was a phone? Or what if that was my mouse? Like something that I could throw because it's right there in my hands. And some people, that's why we need to practice. They waved them instead of throwing them. I don't know if that's a fear reaction or they just weren't sure what to do with them. Any other questions?
DJ, can you say a little bit about like, you know, all the folks attending work in clinics, and is there recommendations of what are some things like to put into practice or best approaches of what they can take back to their clinics as they're considering, creating policies and procedures or developing training for staff? Like, what are some of those things that, like, what's the right place to start?
A lot of times the right place to start, honestly, is just a conversation. So if you have a team meeting, sit down with the team and talk about, everybody's seen it on the news. And so I'll just say the first thing is communication, right? Because a lot of times people don't want to talk about it. I've worked with administrators in the past and it's sort of like, oh, we don't want to talk about that. Well, it's still happening, right? So not talking about it is not going to prevent it. And when we know staff are concerned because they're watching the same news, let's have a conversation. So starting there, let's have a conversation. Then that conversation is, what are they the most concerned about? And honestly, a lot of times it's the reception desk is the most concerned because they know that they're the first people that when somebody comes in the door, right? So part of that training then is, a lot of people are surprised. It's not metal detectors and bulletproof glass. It's training on pre-attack indicators. A lot of it goes back to situational awareness. If I'm watching who's coming through the door, I'm watching who's crossing the parking lot, I'm going to have more chance to react to an event before it happens, making sure that they know how to use alerting equipment. I've done security assessments in a bunch of places where they have a panic button that doesn't go anywhere. I'm like, who does this go to? Well, I don't know. And then we find out it was to the cell phone of the security guard that quit 2 years ago. It's not hooked up to 911. If you have overhead paging, make sure everybody knows how to use it. Make sure they know what to say, right? Because now that scenario, what do? We're watching someone come across the parking lot. We have the ability to increase communication, tell everybody, to shelter in place or whatever we're going to do. We're buying time. But really the short story there is just start having the conversation. You'll be surprised that this is sort of a number one, point of concern for people. Taking it back now, if you want to start building policies, a lot of times I say start with workplace security, workplace violence policies, because I actually like to teach those before this. They're actually more relevant most of the time. Because it's pretty infrequent, especially in healthcare, that you're just going to have like completely, unexpected active shooter events. These are generally workplace violence type thing, or it's a patient's family. So there were some indicators, things that we should have been able to recognize, share, right? But the employees often, this is the thing they're talking about the most. And so a lot of the times that I've done this training, it's because this is not even on your HVA. This isn't a hazard that you've even identified, but this is the top concern of the employees. I see.
Yeah, so we have 2 more questions, but I just want to let everyone know we are at time. It is 2:30, so I want to honor and respect your times. If you're able to, please stay on. I will have DJ answer the remaining questions. If you have to log off, we completely understand. I just want you to be aware that you shall be receiving a very short survey. So if you can please take it, it would be greatly appreciated. And of course, give us any feedback. We will have DJ back for another training on August 31st. So if there's other things we should incorporate or have him think about, that would be helpful as you provide feedback in the evaluation. So thank you everyone for joining. And if you can, please stay on. DJ, Kimberly did ask, moral dilemma, patients who are not able to move quickly, do staff run themselves, or is there obligation to keep their patients' safe well-being?
Yeah. First, real quick, before anybody else drops off, I did put my email in the chat as well. So if you want to email me with questions, I'm open to that. So patients that are not able to move quickly, this is interesting, right? And this is one of those things that always comes up in debrief. And so I think there's no legal, let's just start there, right? There's no legal statute, precedent, whatever directive that you have to stay with your patient, right? This is going to be some more moral dilemma, as to your point. My business partner, when we used to consult doing this stuff, his wife is a NICU nurse, and we had this conversation when we were training the hospital she worked in, their NICU nurses, none of them were going to leave, right? These are all children in isolates, and they were all just going to go down with the ship. And then I've done this training in emergency rooms, and this is not me, but this is gonna sound callous, where the emergency room nurses are like, well, if it's that guy who's in here like 3 times a week, I'm not staying, right? So I think it's the environment you're in, how capable. I know personally, if I was in a room and I had, pediatric patients or somebody who's not ambulatory, I'm probably going to try to barricade them in with me. If that's not a safe situation and I just can't get that person to react, like I'm saying, we got to go now, we've got to go now, and they've just given up on the floor, crying themselves to sleep, I might have to make the decision to run. Again, it is going to be a personal moral dilemma. There's not really a legal precedent that you have to follow there. It's a personal choice. But having said that, it's a personal choice that you should think about now. Know what you'll do and what the triggers will be, right? Even if you go through like the run, hide, fight, all those things, they'll tell you that if people won't go with you, leave. Because you have to realize that at some point, if I cannot get them to go with me, then we're both dead, and it hasn't done any good at all.
There's another question. What are your thoughts on the use of non-lethal protective devices such as pepper spray, a stun gun, assuming that the proper training is provided?
Yeah, I think they're good. I mean, there are some caveats and certain things with health code and whatever, where you can use pepper sprays, and obviously you're going to have issues if you blow off, pepper spray inside of a patient room with, first of all, getting yourself. If you've never been pepper sprayed, it's fun. Our patients that are asthmatic and things like that. The other thing is just realizing that they're not always foolproof, right? So I think the first point, what is my thought on them? I think they're great, again, as said, with the proper training, the proper procedures, like when they would be deployed, right? Because you don't want people overreacting and using them. But in a lethal sort of situation, like an active shooter, it could be one last step. I don't know that I would want to train security personnel to try to interact with somebody with a firearm with pepper spray. But again, if this is my last option and I'm already cornered and I can't get out, I mean, I'm willing to hit him in the face with a fire extinguisher, then a stun gun is good as well. The other thing is just to realize they don't always work. Having been law enforcement prior, been pepper sprayed and military CS gas, right? Pepper spray doesn't actually work on me. It's weird, but it doesn't do anything. Now, tear gas works and it hurts really bad. So that would work, but somebody would pepper spray me, it doesn't do anything. Stun guns work. Unless, and we just saw this with the Buffalo, New York shooter, he was wearing body armor. So he actually got shot in the chest by the security guard and it didn't kill him, right? So he was able to return fire and kill the security guard. So in that case, even having a firearm wasn't effective. So again, good ideas with proper training, maybe the proper mindset that that's not going to be something they're going to try to go take the person out with pepper spray, because that would not be a very smart move, and that they can fail. Sorry, it's a long way of going around the answer. There's a lot to consider there, but I wouldn't discount it. I don't think it's a bad idea.
Okay, I think that was our last question. Thank you so much for joining us today, DJ, and thank you everyone else for joining us in this training today. And we look forward to hearing back from you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email DJ or myself.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.